I fear that this type of video is going to become very frequent on this channel. I finished up what I was working on this morning. I looked at my phone and there was an alert that over 15 schools had been involved in the newest NCAA gambling scandal. And today I want to walk through some of those articles, talk about what occurred, and look to the future in hopes that we can figure out what we do about this problem that is but a chick just poking its beak out from the egg right now. And I think we have plenty more chicks that are going to hatch. So I want to walk through the information in this, understand that we have very limited information as this indictment was just sort of brought to the public. There's going to be some familiar names in this. It is all one ginormous conspiracy. So I want to give you guys the information and then give my opinion on where we are and where we're headed. So an overview, some allegations, how the scheme worked, the colleges impacted, who was charged, and then my takeaway. So here is a timeline, and this is important because it looks to be two separate things. And in fact, the NCAA and the FBI were concerned that this was going to come down to multiple heads of the snake. And that's not the case. This is a single conspiracy. So it started in the Chinese Basketball Association in September of 2022, and it stayed there for about a year when it then shifted to college basketball. And it sadly, even if it started in late 2023, it went through an entire season in college basketball, maybe 2 seasons, a season and a half of college basketball where this was not caught. The games were actively being rigged across 16 different schools with no knowledge to the general public, to the NCAA, to legal authorities. So it went across D1 schools, which we'll talk about. There's many schools that you're going to recognize, many schools that you may have even walked the campus of, many schools that you may even root for. And eventually it led us to today where these indictments were unsealed. So 20 different individuals across these schools. These range from gamblers. These range from trainers at the college level. These are obviously athletes at the college level. Like I said, started in China, but then moved to college basketball. And over almost 40 different players in total. So, roughly, and it doesn't go into detail. It does list some of the names, but, roughly 2 per school is what this was coming down to. 17 programs, 29 plus games fixed or attempted, millions of dollars wagers, and bribes for the players and people involved ranging from 10 to 30,000 per game. So I'm going to walk through how it worked roughly. Again, more information is going to come out. This is sort of the bare bones of what we know thus far. This was one giant coordinated conspiracy. And it is something that started, like I said, in China, and it moved over to college. It involves shaving points, not necessarily match fixing. In other words, this is betting the spread. So if a team is favored to win by 12 points, one of the people at the head of the snake may communicate with the people on the team and say, hey, we're going to take the other team plus 12.5, which means we think that your team is going to win by less than 12.5 points or lose the game outright. And so the players know we can still win the game. If we're up by 7 in the late stages of the game and I get fouled and go to the free throw line and there's 10 seconds left, I don't need to hit these, right? I just have to make sure we don't win by more than 12. So it's not necessarily match fixing in terms of teams were trying to win or lose on purpose. I'm sure there was some of that. There was a ton of games, as you saw. I'm sure it happened at times, but they were trying to stay under the radar by just shaving points. Spread manipulation is what was mentioned in the indictment, that they were more concerned about how much they won or lost by than the win or losing themselves. So one player who we're going to talk about, Antonio Blakeney, was sort of we'll call him the middleman. He's not the head of the snake, but he's certainly the abdomen of the snake. College players were recruited by Blakeney. He was playing in China at the time, and he sort of it looked like he was the bridge between the China connection and the college basketball connection. And obviously this network expanded across schools. So what would happen is, obviously, I kind of explained it, the defendants would place bets after they'd agreed to fix these games Sports books and bettors obviously were defrauded. Millions were wagered by this collective conspiracy. The NCAA initially thought these were separate cases, and it wasn't until it moved up the food chain where the FBI was like, no. Like this, what you thought were unconnected issues, this is all one big entity. And before this is an overview, who was charged. We're going to talk about specifically who was charged, and it's going to all make a bunch of sense. They're going to be familiar names. So 17 former or current college basketball players, 2 trainers, 2 high-stakes gamblers or fixers. These would be the orchestrators of the event, the heads of the snake, as I referred to previously. Some of them were actively playing. Some of these 17 were actively playing in these games, and some have already been sanctioned by the NFL. So the first head of the snake, the first guy in charge of this is Marvis Fairley, who, if you'll look down here, 3 months ago, one of the defendants in a previous case we had just seen, Marvis Fairley, and a co-conspirator who was friends with the player on the Orlando Magic, learned hours before the team's lineup was announced that he would not be playing its regular players that night against the Cavs. So this is not Marvis Fairley's first rodeo. And it says Marvis Fairley and Shane Hennon, who we'll talk about in a second, were working in tandem with Antonio Blakeney, who I talked about, the Chinese basketball player, and so these 3 were sort of the presidents, and the vice president was Blakeney. So the other guy mentioned is Shane Hennon, and this should be very, very familiar to you because Shane Hennon orchestrated a scheme to have NBA players like Miami guard Terry Rozier and Jonte Porter pull themselves from the game. So this is all coming together. It's all one big umbrella. The Jonte Porter, the Terry Rozier, even down here, Hennon was supplying the cheating technology, the card shufflers, and the rigged poker games that Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones were in. Shane Hennon was in charge of nearly, so, in basketball, he was some way in charge of every basketball scandal we've seen thus far. And I don't know, we've seen some with MLB, and I don't believe he's involved in that, but we look at these Terry Rozier and Jonte Porter issues and we say, wow, this is bad, this is huge. And then we get this college one and we say, oh, it's getting worse. And I'm not trying to undermine this in any way, shape, or form, but in some ways it makes me feel better that it's all the same person. It feels like it's a little bit more condensed. Like, okay, if we can get rid of this guy, I'm sure it still goes on. I'm sure we'll catch other guys, but at least it's not multiple wings of the same crime. I hope that makes sense. So here's a picture of Shane Hennon sitting courtside, and he's in deep stuff. I mean, all of it. And again, I don't know how this was necessarily caught. I don't know if in order to get out of charge, I don't know how legal stuff works. That's not my wheelhouse. But I don't know if he's cooperating in a way to reduce a sentence, like if he's been charged for this, this, and this, if he cooperates and gives more information about everything else he's done, if he fesses up to that, if his sentences is less, I don't know how any of that works. But regardless, he was involved in nearly every scandal we've seen so far. So Antonio Blakeney is a former NBA player. I say that. He was undrafted. He went to the Bulls G League team, the Windy City Bulls, for a couple years. And then he's just been overseas since 2019 playing in China. He played at LSU. He agreed to shave points, and he was sort of the recruiter. He was paid $200,000 cash after the season, and he was the one, again, who recruited the NCAA players. So the fixers and gamblers at the top of the food chain are this Shane and Marvis guy, and then Blakeney was kind of under them. He was sort of their runner, if you will, and then the other professional and NCAA players were still involved. So the school's named. This is probably the most disappointing part. Not that you could give me schools that I would say, who cares? But I think you could give me schools that I would say, okay. I expect that. They have less to play for. It's less notoriety. It can skate under the radar. Like if you're showing me a D3 school, I'm like, yeah, of course that happened. But to see a Butler, to see a lot of these MAC schools, there's 4 MAC schools on here: Western Michigan, Buffalo, Kent State, Ohio, all MAC schools. You got the AAC, SLC, A10, Big East. The Big East is a little bit problematic. I know the Big East isn't what it used to be in terms of college basketball. We don't have the ACC on here. We don't have the SEC on here. We don't have the Big Ten on here. I'm not saying that they're innocent. I'm sure things are going on, but I think it works its way up. 75% of the programs were from these mid-major conferences, still Division I, still relevant, still matter. People are still betting on these teams and on these games. So I'm not trying to minimize this. This is a big deal. I do fear that we're going to become bigger deals as we move forward. So that's the information that we have. If we think about where we go from here, I've written some articles and talked at length about where we are as a society as it relates to the ubiquity and ease of mobilized sports betting, and said that I believe we need legislation and we need regulation so that these things either don't happen or are caught easier, or gambling can be made a little safer to our world. This is not my area of expertise. Crime, like wide scale, high profile crime like this, is not something I know a ton about. I did watch a very interesting podcast yesterday. It's called The Hidden Third, and it was with a cocaine quarterback. As some of you may know, it was a player who played for USC and ended up getting involved in gambling and cocaine, and I'm sure you've heard of him. He's got a lot of different pieces of content out there. And he sort of talked about this idea that the people who commit these crimes, they're adrenaline junkies. They are never going to be satisfied. They live for, like, he says a lot of the reason why this stuff is so pervasive in athletics and gambling and why it's a bad mix is because athletes are competitive. Athletes love a rush. Athletes love a challenge. And so you're giving athletes adrenaline on top of adrenaline by making them feel like they are doing something illegal, like they get a rush from that. And he talks about in this podcast how when he was on USC's, he started as a volleyball player, he went across the border to Tijuana and got all these steroids because he got cut from the volleyball team, and they said he was too small, so he's juicing. And he said that when he was coming across the border and Border Patrol was like, hey, are you bringing anything over? And he's smuggling all these steroids. And he said he lied, and he said no. And he's like, that's the first lie I ever remember telling in my life. He's like, I was a good, honest kid. And I lied to the Border Patrol. And as I left, he said, the feeling was unbelievable. Like, I felt bad, but it also felt amazing. And he said that high of like the adrenaline of lying to an officer, he said he chased, and it just led him to do more and more things. So, we open ourselves up to this occurring just based on where we are. And people are going to say, well, the legalization is the problem. We shouldn't have it legalized. And I don't have an answer for that. I do think that the black market, people are still going to find a way to do it. And I think less people will find a way to do it. But it's not to say that these sort of issues don't exist on a black market level. Now, the other argument is that when it is legalized, it gives us a chance to catch these people. We have FanDuel and DraftKings be able to cooperate and hand over information that is helpful in catching these criminals. Whereas if they're doing it offshore, if they're doing it on the unregulated market, it is not. We can't expect that those entities would cooperate with federal law enforcement. So, I've talked at length, and I don't. This is one of those things that I don't think we fix it. I don't think it gets better. I want to have like a neatly packaged bow tied sticker that says, hey, here is how we fix people committing these crimes. I don't know how that happens, and I don't think we do. Because if people have a way to make money and make money cheap, they're going to do and try everything possible. So I think what sports books may do, and maybe this is what we get, which is going to make a lot of people upset, is we see stricter offerings from sports books. Maybe college player props are no longer offered. Maybe college unders are no longer offered. Maybe we get a case where you can't live bet, or there are really steep limits for all customers on some of these mid-American schools. Like Ohio is playing Buffalo on a Thursday afternoon, maybe there's legislation that's passed that books can only accept up to $1,000 on a spread, no matter who you are. I don't know. I'm just offering what I think may be a reasonable fix. And that's not to say that once we fix that regulated market, that these people are still not going to point shave and go bet on an offshore. It still can be a problem. And I think that's why it's so hard for me to solve, because I don't think it can be fully solved. So we'll see what happens. I chuckle and I say, at least it's the same group. It does give me some fear, some solace that it's like, okay, it's the same head of the snake. Just cut the head off, and maybe we'll live in peace and prosperity. We won't. There'll be another snake head soon enough. So that's what happened. More info, I'm sure, is going to follow. I'll go ahead and drop the articles that I referenced down in the comments in case you want those. Otherwise, I guess the safest thing you can do, and the way that you can be impacted the least by this, is enjoy other things in life. Take a night off of watching the NBA and go do something you used to enjoy doing. Read a book, watch a documentary, go on a walk, and if you are sports betting, do it in a way that you are adding something to your life and trying to have fun and not chasing a win. Because I will tell you, and it's just like you watch these people operate, there are no satisfying wins that will ultimately say, okay, I'm done. Like, I've bet enough, I've won enough, I'm never going to bet again. There's some people that can do that, but the people who have the real problems, and even myself included in the past, it's just this never-ending cycle of chasing this thrill. So if you could kind of remove that thrill and make it more about fun than about adrenaline, I think we'll be better off. So that's what I got, and we'll see you next time.